Imagine this outside your window. Evening is quietly settling in. The last golden light of the sun slips through woven curtains, spilling warm honey tones across the wooden floor. In a small room, the hearth still glows faintly from the evening meal, releasing a soft, comforting heat. You're seated in a sturdy oak chair, your hands wrapped around a steaming cup of herbal tea. As I begin to tell you a story from long ago, an age of cobbled streets, church bells echoing across rooftops, rivers glistening in the sunlight, and wooden bathhouses scented faintly of pine resin. Tonight, we're traveling back to the Middle Ages, a time when cleanliness was not something easily maintained day by day. Yet that didn't mean people neglected themselves. They found their own ways, shaped by what was available, what was affordable, and what tradition allowed. Sometimes, their methods were simple and spare. Other times, they were surprisingly elaborate, woven into rituals that brought comfort and order. In this journey, we'll walk slowly between two very different worlds: the bustling town, where public bathhouses hummed with conversation and steam, and the quiet countryside, where the warm glow of a kitchen fire and a humble wooden tub served as the heart of household washing. We want hurried. Each scene will unfold at its own pace, as if turning the pages of an old book with careful, unhurried hands. Close your eyes for a moment, and picture an autumn morning in a medieval market town. The air carries the scent of fresh bread from the communal oven, mingling with the faint tang of wood smoke from 100 chimneys. Vendors have already laid out their goods: baskets of vegetables, gleaming fish, bundles of fragrant herbs. Footsteps echo on the stone, cartwheels creak and groan, and the voices of neighbors greet one another in the cool morning air. On them, you notice a few heading purposefully toward a familiar destination: the town's bathhouse. Now, let that image fade, and let us step into another world. Here lies a small village at the edge of a quiet forest, where the morning begins with the crowing of roosters, and the gentle splash of water drawn from the village well. There is no public bathhouse here. Water comes from the well or from a narrow, quick-flowing stream nearby. And the center of cleanliness is the kitchen, a place where fires burn for cooking, for warmth, and for heating water for a rare, welcome bath. In each place, cleanliness takes on a different shape. In the city, it might mean a large steaming tub in a shared hall, the air damp with heat and chatter. In the countryside, it might be a modest wooden basin set near the fire, where each family member takes their turn. Tonight's story will not judge which was better. Instead, we will simply observe, listen, and learn to understand why people, hundreds of years ago, made the choices they did to keep themselves not perfectly clean by our standards, but clean enough to live, to work, and to keep their dignity in a world that was often hard and unyielding. So lean back in your chair, let the warmth settle around you, and join me as we begin in the busy heart of the medieval town. The town wakes slowly, as it has for centuries. Stone streets still hold the chill from the night before, and thin veils of mist drift between tall, narrow houses. Wooden shutters creak open one by one, letting out the faint scent of bread baking or onions simmering in broth. Somewhere, a church bell tolls a low, measured note, not hurried, not insistent, simply marking the turning of the hour. As the day begins, the people of the town begin to move with purpose. Merchants make their way to the market square, carts rattling over cobblestones. Apprentices sweep the steps of their workshops. Housewives carry baskets of linen toward the public wash area near the river. Among these small processions, there is another, quieter flow: men and women making their way toward the bathhouse. In a medieval town, the bathhouse was more than a place to scrub the skin. It was a kind of public hearth, a warm chamber away from the chill wind and damp stone walls of home. Here, water was not something carried bucket by bucket from a well. It was already heated, waiting, scented faintly with herbs or risen from the wooden tubs. For townsfolk who lived in cramped quarters, where space was precious and firewood expensive, the bathhouse was a place of both necessity and relief. The building itself might not look grand from the outside. The roof would be steep, covered in wooden shingles or red clay tiles, depending on the region. Steam curled from narrow vents near the ridge, especially on cold mornings. A sturdy wooden door, worn smooth by many hands, opened into a low-ceilinged entry room where the air was immediately warmer, touched with the scent of damp wood and faint traces of soap. Inside, there was a small reception area, sometimes attended by a keeper or his assistant, someone who collected the fee, kept track of the schedule, and maintained order. In some towns, the bathhouse was run by the local guild. In others, it was the property of a wealthy family who leased it to operators. The cost to enter might be just a few pennies for a common bather, a little more for a private room. Beyond this space, the bathhouse opened into its main chamber. The floor might be laid with wooden planks or stone slabs worn smooth by countless wet feet. Along one wall, great wooden tubs stood ready, each filled with hot water brought to temperature in a large cauldron over the fire. The water was drawn with ladles, poured carefully to avoid splashing, and then left to steam until it reached a comfortable warmth. The sound in the room was never silent. It was a gentle murmur of voices, the splash of water against wood, the hiss of steam rising from fresh buckets poured into the tubs. Men and women bathed separately, sometimes on different days of the week, sometimes in entirely separate wings of the building. On market days, the bathhouse might be busier, as travelers and traders took the opportunity to wash away the dust of the road. For many, bathing was not a daily affair. In some places, once a week was considered generous. In others, especially during cold seasons, a full bath might be rarer still. But when one did come to the bathhouse, it was not only about removing dirt, it was about renewal. The warm water eased itching muscles after long days of labor. It softened the stiffness in joints. For older townsfolk, the heat itself was a comfort, a brief escape from the persistent chill of stone-walled houses. Herbs were often part of the bathing ritual. In a corner of the bathhouse, a small bundle of dried lavender, rosemary, or chamomile might be steeped in a pot of hot water, its scent drifting gently through the air. In some towns, juniper branches were laid over the water to release a sharp, clean fragrance. These touches were not only pleasant, they were thought to have health benefits, warding off illness or easing coughs. The bathhouse also served as a place of quiet social connection. In a world without modern coffee houses or clubs, this was one of the few public indoor spaces where people could linger without the need to buy food or drink. Here, neighbors exchanged news, mothers spoke softly to their daughters, travelers learned the rhythms of the town through casual conversation. And yet, there was also a respect for silence and understanding that the bath was as much for resting the mind as for cleansing the body. For those with more wealth, the experience could be more elaborate. A private room might contain a tub just for one person or for a small group, with thicker towels, scented oils, and perhaps even a servant to help with rinsing or fetching fresh water. These rooms were quiet, almost hushed, their walls sometimes painted with simple patterns or hung with heavy cloth to keep in the warmth. But whether in the open hall or the private chamber, the moment of lowering oneself into the water was always the same: the release of tension, the sigh that escapes without thought, the slow easing of the day's burden. And for a little while, the outside world with its noise, its labor, its endless demands stayed beyond the heavy wooden door. When the bath was done, one would dry off with a rough linen cloth, the fibers slightly coarse against the skin, and dress again in clothes that now felt lighter, cleaner, and more comfortable. Stepping back out into the street, the cool air would meet the warmth still held in the skin, and there would be a brief, pleasant shiver before the day's tasks resumed. For the townspeople, the bathhouse was not just about hygiene. It was about dignity. To arrive at church on Sunday or to attend a market fair with clean hands, a combed beard, hair smooth and neat, these were small signs of self-respect. And in a world where much was beyond one's control, weather, harvests, taxes, the ability to care for one's own body, even in small ways, was a quiet form of resilience. In the coming parts of our journey, we'll leave this warm, bustling space and walk the quieter paths of the countryside, where no public bathhouse stands at the end of the street, and where the work of drawing, heating, and using water falls entirely within the home. But for now, imagine once more the bathhouse's gentle light, the sound of water moving in wooden tubs, and the comfort of knowing that, at least for today, you are clean, warm, and ready to step back into the life that waits beyond the door. Step through the heavy wooden door, and you leave the street behind. The first breath you take inside is different, warmer, softer, with a faint weight of steam that lingers in the air. The scents are layered, the deep, resinous aroma of wet timber, a thread of wood smoke drifting from the heating hearth, and, just beneath, the gentlest trace of herbs steeping somewhere unseen. The entrance chamber is modest but purposeful. A bench of worn oak runs along one wall, its surface smoothed by decades of cloaks being folded, boots being unlaced, and baskets set down. Hooks of iron, darkened by age, are fixed to the opposite wall for hanging outer garments. Here, bathers pause to remove heavy layers, especially in the colder months, before moving toward the heart of the building. In the corner, the bathhouse keeper sits behind a simple countered or broad plank set atop stout trestles. A small box rests before him to collect the coin fee for entry. The keeper's eyes are practiced. He knows every regular patron by sight, and can tell with a glance if a stranger is from the countryside or another town. His hands are calloused, for tending a bathhouse is not gentle work. Firewood must be split, water hauled, tubs scrubbed clean. The bathhouse is, in many ways, a living machine, and the keeper its watchful steward. Beyond this small threshold, the main chamber opens up, and here the true heart of the bathhouse reveals itself. The air grows heavier, the warmth embracing you like a familiar quilt. In the center of the room, wooden tubs stand in an orderly row, their curved staves bound by iron hoops. The wood, often oak or pine, is darkened by years of contact with water and heat. When fresh water is poured in, the tub releases its scent, a mingling of sap, resin, and the mineral tang of the water itself. Some tubs are large enough for several bathers to sit together, the water reaching mid-chest when seated. Others are smaller, meant for one or two people at most. In larger towns, there might even be shallow basins for foot soaking or washing linens, though these are set apart from the main bathing area. The soundscape here is rich but muted, no loud voices, no shouting. The steady rhythm of ladles scooping water, the trickle of fresh hot water poured from buckets, the soft murmur of conversation. Now and then, a laugh drifts up from a group sharing a tub, but it quickly settles back into the calm hum of the room. The atmosphere is neither solemn nor boisterous, but something between a kind of shared quiet where work-worn bodies and weary minds can rest. Against one wall, a great hearth or furnace burns steadily. Upon it rests a massive iron cauldron, its belly round and blackened from years of use. This is the source of the bathhouse's life: hot water, heated slowly and constantly, drawn off as needed to replenish the tubs. An assistant, often a young boy apprenticed to the keeper, tends the fire, stirs the water, and carefully tests its heat before carrying it to the waiting bathers. Its footsteps leave small wet prints on the wooden floorboards, quickly absorbed into the well-worn grain. Light enters the bathhouse in a subdued way. Small windows, high on the walls, let in only a softened glow. In the evening, candles set in iron sconces or simple clay holders add their flickering light to the steam, casting shadows that ripple gently across the damp walls. This dimness is intentional. Bright light is not needed here. The bathhouse is a place where the body can relax without the scrutiny of harsh daylight. Near the far side of the chamber, a bench holds bundles of dried herbs: lavender with its pale purple buds still clinging to the stems, rosemary, its needle-like leaves sharp and green even when dry, chamomile flowers, their yellow centers cradled by papery white petals. From time to time, the keeper or an assistant drops a bundle into a pot of hot water, letting the fragrant steam drift through the room. Some bathers scoop a little of this scented water into their own tubs, believing it cleanses the skin more thoroughly or soothes small itches. For those who can afford it, the bathhouse may offer private alcoves. These small, curtained spaces hold a single tub and a bench for resting afterward. Here, a bather might request extra hot water, scented oils, or even a brief massage with Rivlian cloths to scrub away dead skin. Privacy is a luxury, but even in the main hall, there is a shared respect. Eyes are cast downward, conversations stay low, and movements are unhurried. The bathhouse also keeps simple tools for grooming: wooden combs with wide teeth to ease tangles, Rivlian towels for drying, and small basins for rinsing the face or hair. Many patrons bring their own cloths and combs from home, but the bathhouse's implements are always available for those who do not. In winter, the warmth inside feels almost miraculous. Stepping in from a street where frost whitens every stone and breath clouds the air, to find yourself surrounded by heat and steam, is a comfort beyond words. You can feel the stiffness leave your hands as you soak them, the cold retreating from your toes, the weight of the season lifting just a little. In summer, the bathhouse is less about escaping the cold and more about washing away the sweat and dust of long, bright days. Not everyone in town comes here. Some have private arrangements in their own homes, though these are rare outside the wealthiest households. Others may bathe at the river's edge in warmer months. But for many, especially those living in cramped quarters above shops or in shared dwellings, the bathhouse is a welcome respite, a place to breathe a little more deeply, to linger over the simple act of caring for one's body. And so, hour by hour, the bathhouse fills and empties, its rhythm steady, unchanging, season after season. Children grow into adults here, learning the customs of modesty and self-care. Old men and women find relief for their itching bones. Travelers, strangers to the town, step through its door and leave with a little of the town's warmth carried in their skin. In the flicker of candlelight, with the murmur of voices, and the steady hush of water, the bathhouse becomes something more than wood and stone. It is a small pocket of peace in a world that often moves too quickly, a reminder that the simplest comforts, warmth, water, and time, are the ones that linger longest in memory. Every place that welcomes many people under one roof must have its rules. The medieval bathhouse was no exception. Though each town's customs might differ, there were threads of etiquette that ran through nearly all of them, not written on a board, but passed down through habit, observation, and the quiet reminders of the bathhouse keeper. The first rule began before you even crossed the threshold: timing. In most towns, men and women did not bathe together, at least not in the same hall at the same time. Days or hours were divided, often with men taking the early part of the day and women the later, though some towns reversed this order. On market days, the schedule could shift, allowing travelers their turn. The keeper would know the rhythm well, and a newcomer would quickly learn that arriving at the wrong hour meant waiting, sometimes for hours, in the chill of the street. Once inside, another unspoken rule took hold: move slowly. The bathhouse was not a place for hurried steps or abrupt movements. The floors could be damp, and haste was not only unsafe but discouraged. Part of the bathhouse's purpose was to slow the pace of the day. Even conversation seemed to follow this unhurried rhythm. Voices softened, pauses stretched. A shouted greeting or loud laugh was met with gentle but firm glances, a reminder that this was a shared space for quiet renewal. Cleanliness began before entering the tub. It was common practice to rinse oneself first, often at a small basin near the wall or with a ladle of cooler water poured over the head and shoulders. This quick wash removed the dust and sweat of the street, ensuring that the shared hot water stayed as fresh as possible for everyone who followed. Some bathhouses even had a separate, smaller room for this initial rinsing, though in smaller towns it might simply be done at the edge of the main room. Personal belongings were kept neatly to the side. Clothing was folded or hung on hooks, towels laid over benches. In busier bathhouses, attendants might watch over these items. Though theft was rare, the bathhouse was a place where trust was valued, and stealing from a fellow bather would carry a heavy social cost. Respect for personal space was another key element of etiquette. In the larger tubs, where several people might sit together. One did not crowd another. Space was left between bathers whenever possible, and in more formal settings, a nod or quiet greeting would suffice before settling into the water. While the bathhouse was a social space, conversation was kept discreet, no prying questions, no intrusive remarks. There was also a modesty in movement and gaze. Bathers often wrapped themselves in a light cloth as they moved between areas, not to fully hide, but as a gesture of respect. In some places, especially among women, bathing gowns were worn in simple linen shifts that could be soaked along with the body. On men, a small cloth or loin covering might serve the same purpose. Nudity itself was not considered shameful in the same way it might be today, but there was still an understanding that the bathhouse was not a stage for display. The use of scents was another area of quiet etiquette. Herbs and oils were welcome in moderation, especially in private tubs, but overwhelming fragrances were discouraged. A handful of rosemary in the water was considered pleasant. Pouring in half a jar of imported oil would have been seen as wasteful, even boastful. In shared tubs, the scents were chosen by the keeper, not the bathers, so that no one's preference would overpower the rest. For those receiving treatments such as a vigorous scrubbing with Revlon cloths, or a brief massage, there was a certain order. These were usually done after soaking, when the skin was warm and pliable. The attendant, often an older woman for female patrons or an experienced man for male patrons, would work with practiced hands, speaking little but with care in each movement. Payment for such services was given directly and discreetly afterward. Children were welcome, but they too had their rules. They were expected to stay close to their parents, to avoid splashing excessively, and to learn the bathhouse manners early. For many children, their first visits were more about watching and learning than about bathing themselves. By the time they were old enough to sit quietly in the tub, the customs were already second nature. One of the most important rules, though unspoken, was the rule of departure. When your time in the water was done, you did not linger endlessly. You allowed others their turn. You dried yourself, dressed, and stepped out with the same quiet grace you had entered. The warmth of the bath lingered on the skin, but the street outside was waiting, with all its brisk air and daily tasks. There were, of course, rules enforced by the town or the guild, especially in larger cities. Bathhouses were sometimes inspected to ensure the water was changed often enough, the floors kept clean, and the heating fires tended safely. In times of illness or plague, public bathing might even be suspended for weeks or months, not because of the water itself, but because of the close quarters. Interruptions were deeply felt, as the bathhouse was one of the few communal comforts in an otherwise hard life. But on ordinary days, the rules and etiquette worked quietly in the background, shaping the bathhouse into what it was meant to be, a place where people could trust one another's company, share the gift of warmth and water, and leave feeling not just cleaner in body, but lighter in spirit. The bathhouse keeper knew these rules well, for he was their guardian. A raised eyebrow from him could restore order faster than a shouted command. His role was not only to tend fires and tubs, but to preserve the delicate balance of comfort, respect, and community within those steaming walls. And so, the bathhouse thrived not through grand architecture or luxury, but through the shared understanding that here, for the space of an hour or two, everyone had the right to warmth, to rest, and to leave the weight of the outside world at the door. While the public bathhouse welcomed nearly everyone who could pay its modest fee, there was another world of bathing in the medieval town, one hidden behind high stone walls, iron-banded gates, and finely carved wooden doors. This was the world of the wealthy, where bathing was not only a necessity but a mark of refinement and status. For a prosperous merchant, a high-ranking guild master, or a noble family residing within the town's fortified heart, the experience of bathing could be entirely private. Instead of walking through the narrow streets to share water with neighbors, they could summon warmth and water into their own homes. This required space, the luxury in itself in crowded towns, and the means to pay servants for the constant labor that bathing demanded. In a well-to-do household, the bath was often taken in a special chamber, sometimes adjacent to the bedchamber, other times in a room of its own. The walls might be paneled in wood or hung with thick, embroidered cloth to hold in heat. Floors were covered with woven rush mats or sturdy boards instead of bare stone. These details were not just for beauty, they were practical measures to keep the bather warm and comfortable. The centerpiece of such a room was the tub, not the plain, darkened wood of the public hall, but a carefully crafted vessel, often lined with lion or canvas for comfort. Some were made from finely planed oak with polished iron bands, a few might even be lined with copper, its surface catching the flicker of candlelight and warm, reddish glints. A thick cushion or folded cloth might be placed at the bather's back, and small wooden rests were provided for the arms. Before the bath began, servants would fetch bucket after bucket of water from the household well or a nearby source. Each load had to be carried in, heated in large cauldrons over the kitchen fire, and then poured carefully into the waiting tub. It could take an hour or more to prepare a bath for a single person. The work was heavy and constant, and the hum of activity in the kitchen signaled that a bath was in progress upstairs. Herbs and scents were used more liberally in these private baths. A wealthy household could afford imported spices or oils, cinnamon from distant ports, rosewater distilled in copper stills, or costly frankincense. Bundles of lavender and rosemary, common even in simpler homes, might be tied with silk ribbon here, their scent mingling with the sharper sweetness of exotic resins. Sometimes a small sachet of crushed petals and dried herbs was placed directly into the water, releasing its fragrance slowly as the bather settled in. The experience itself was unhurried. The bather might recline for long stretches, the water kept warm by servants who discreetly added fresh buckets from time to time. Soft linen cloths were used for washing, smoother and gentler than the rougher fabrics in public baths. A comb of fine horn or polished wood might be passed through the hair, working out tangles with patient care. In some homes, a trusted servant or even a hired bath attendant was skilled in massage, using warmed oils to ease the shoulders, back, and limbs. For noble families, bathing could also be a semi-public act within the household, an occasion when trusted ladies in waiting or close attendants were present, not merely as helpers, but as witnesses to the refinement of the ritual. In such settings, conversation might drift toward poetry, the news from court, or the arranging of marriages and alliances. The bath became a stage for displaying both wealth and cultural polish. The clothing worn before and after the bath reflected this same refinement. After drying with thick, well-laundered linen, the bather might be wrapped in a soft robe of wool or fur-lined fabric in the colder months. Slippers of leather or embroidered cloth were placed at the ready. Hair was gently dried and sometimes lightly perfumed with scented water before being braided or arranged. But even here, in these private rooms where the air was rich with heat and scent, the purpose of bathing was still practical at its core. A clean, well-kept appearance was a visible sign of status. In crowded, often grimy streets of a medieval town, to walk abroad in garments that smelled faintly of herbs and with hair smooth and fresh was to mark oneself apart from the press of common life. It's easy to imagine, late on a winter's evening, a wealthy merchant's wife seated in her copper tub, steam curling upward into the shadows above. Candles burn low in their sconces, their light caught in the threads of gold embroidery on the wall hangings. Beyond the heavy door, the servants move quietly, refilling buckets from the kitchen fire. The only sounds in the room are the gentle drip of water from the cloth in her hands, and the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. In that moment, the chill of the season is forgotten, replaced by the deep, still warmth that comes from being entirely, luxuriously at ease. And yet, for all its elegance, private bathing lacked something the public bathhouse provided: the hum of shared life, the mingling of stories, the sense of being part of a living community. In the private bath, the world was smaller, more contained, more curated. In the public hall, it was wide and unpredictable, as full of human variety as the market square itself. Still, for those who could afford it, this privacy was a treasure. It meant bathing when one wished, without waiting for the scheduled hours or sharing space with strangers. It meant choosing the herbs, the temperature, even the company. And it meant that, long after the bath was over, the bather could step into clean clothes in a warm room, with the night closed out beyond thick walls and shuttered windows. In our next step, we'll leave these private chambers of luxury behind. We'll walk past the market square, out through the town gate, and follow the winding road into the countryside, where the rhythms of bathing are shaped by different needs, different tools, and different kinds of comfort. Leaving the bustle of the town behind, the road narrows, its cobblestones giving way to packed earth. Hedges and low stone walls mark the edges of small fields, and the air shifts less tinged with smoke and market smells, more open, carrying the faint sweetness of grass and the sharper scent of wood piles drying in the sun. You can hear the difference too. The layered noise of the town fades into a quieter world, where the wind carries only the rustle of leaves, the creak of a cardacle, and the occasional call of a distant cow. The village is small, perhaps no more than 20 houses, each with walls of wattle and daub or rough-cut timber, their thatched roofs sloping low. Chickens wander the packed earth yards, scratching at the soil. A few houses have vegetable gardens close by, with rows of cabbage, onions, and leeks. Life here moves at a different pace, slower, yet in some ways more relentless, tied closely to the turning of seasons and the needs of the land. Here, there is no public bathhouse at the end of the lane. There is no building where steam rises from a cameel tub, no set hours for men or women. Instead, the work of staying clean or clean enough belongs entirely to the household. And at the center of that work is the kitchen. The kitchen in a medieval village home is not a room set apart for one purpose. It is the heart of the dwelling, the place where heat is made and food prepared, where light lingers the longest in winter, and where the family gathers by instinct. In the largest houses, it might be a separate space with a chimney and hearth. In the smallest, it is simply the open area where the fire burns, shared with the main living space. In this room stands the hearth, not just for cooking, but for warmth and for heating water. The hearth fire is rarely allowed to go out. Rekindling it from nothing is far more trouble than keeping a small ember alive beneath the ash overnight. Around the fire are the tools of daily life, iron pots blackened by years of use, wooden ladles, a cauldron hanging from a hook, and, leaning against the wall, a round belly wooden tub. This tub is more than a container. It is the bath. It might be used for laundry in the morning, for scrubbing root vegetables in the afternoon, and on certain evenings, for bathing. Its wood is pale and smooth from years of handling, Its iron hoops darkened and slightly rusted at the edges. It holds only enough water to cover the lower body when seated. To wash the upper body, one must pour or ladle the warmed water over the shoulders. The ritual of bathing in such a home begins long before the first drop of water touches skin. Water must be fetched from a well in the yard, a shared well in the village center, or a stream nearby. This means carrying heavy wooden buckets, each trip adding to the weight in the arms and the itch in the back. Once enough water is gathered, it is poured into the cauldron over the fire, where it slowly takes on the warmth of the flames. This can take the better part of an hour, especially in winter, when cold air and icy buckets seem to steal the heat away. While the water warms, the kitchen becomes a place of preparation. A small bundle of herbs might be added to the cauldron, mint or thyme in summer, dried lavender or sage in winter. These are not luxuries here, they are practical, drawn from the garden or hedgerow, chosen for their scent and their simple cleansing properties. The air in the kitchen shifts subtly as the herbs release their fragrance, blending with the smoke of the hearth. When the water is ready, it is poured carefully into the waiting tub. The first person to bathe is often the head of the household, though customs vary. In some families, children are bathed first so they can be put to bed early, leaving the parents time to wash in quiet. In others, the youngest wait until last, using the water after the adults. Privacy is limited. In most homes, screens or curtains are rare. Bathing is done with a kind of practical modesty, turning the body slightly away, using a cloth to cover when needed. Unlike the endless warmth of a town bathhouse, heat here is precious. As the water cools, fresh buckets from the cauldron may be added, but each one costs firewood, a resource gathered and stored with care. In winter, the cold of the unheated parts of the house presses close, making the circle of warmth around the tub feel small and fragile. Bathing is not always a full-body event. On many days, cleanliness is kept with partial washing, hands and face in the morning, perhaps feet at night. A cloth dipped in warm water can be used to wipe the arms, neck, and behind the ears. Hair washing is rarer still, as it requires more water and time to dry in the cool air. Still, there is a certain comfort in this humble bath. The fire's glow paints the room in amber light. The scent of herbs rises with the steam. Outside, the night closes in, but here, in the kitchen's warmth, there is a moment of pause, a small reclaiming of the body from the grit and labor of the day. The walls may be simple, the tub small, but the feeling of warmth sinking into tired muscles is a luxury in its own right. When the bath is done, the water is carried out, poured away onto the ground or into the garden. The tub is set aside to dry, ready for its next use, perhaps for laundry tomorrow, or for brining meat in the coming week. The kitchen returns to its usual life, the fire tended, the floor swept, the table cleared. But for the one who bathed, the skin feels lighter, the mind calmer, and the long night ahead somehow softer. In the countryside, bathing is not a public act, and it is not a social one beyond the family circle. It is no less important. It speaks of care for oneself, for one's household, for the rhythm of life that must balance work with rest. And in the glow of the kitchen hearth, with the quiet of the village outside, this care feels all the more precious. Before a single drop of warm water touches skin, there is the quiet labor of preparation, a ritual in itself, as familiar to the household as the turning of the seasons. In countryside, water does not flow from a pipe at the turn of a handle. It must be fetched, carried, and coaxed into heat by hands that know the weight of a bucket and the patience of waiting for a pot to boil. The first step begins outside, where the air holds whatever the season gives. In winter, it may bite at the fingers, numbing them around the bucket's handle. In summer, it may press heavy and warm, the sun high enough to cast sharp shadows along the path. The well stands at the center of the yard or perhaps near the edge of the lane, its stone walls cool to the touch, its wooden roof weathered by rain and sun. The rope creaks as the bucket descends, the sound echoing faintly down into the darkness. The water that comes up is cold, startlingly so in the summer, almost biting in the winter. It carries the scent of earth and stone, a reminder that it has traveled unseen beneath fields and roots to arrive here. Each bucket is lifted carefully to avoid spilling, its contents shimmering in the light before being poured into a larger pail or carried directly to the kitchen. The trip must be repeated again and again until there is enough for the bath. A single tub can swallow more water than one realizes. Even a shallow fill takes several journeys. Often, this task is shared, a father and son, or two sisters, each taking turns at the rope and carrying the load. In some villages, children learn early to carry smaller buckets, their steps quick and careful to avoid sloshing too much onto the path. Once inside the kitchen, the water is poured into the great cauldron that hangs over the hearth or rests on the broad stones beside it. The cauldron's iron belly has been seasoned by years of cooking soups, stews, and dye baths, its blackened surface holding the faint scent of past meals and work. When water meets the hot metal, a low hiss rises, and the first ghost of steam curls upward. Fuel for the fire must be chosen with care. In winter, wood is precious. Seasoned oak or ash logs are saved for the coldest nights. For heating bath water, smaller pieces, twigs, and split pine may be used, quick to catch, quick to burn, their resin scent mingling with the damp coolness of the water. The fire is coaxed higher, Embers stirred until they glow bright beneath the grate. As the water warms, the kitchen air changes. The faint mineral tang of the well water softens, and the first threads of steam loosen the chill from the air. In the cauldron may go a bundle of herbs gathered from the garden in summer, dried and tied with twine to last through the winter. Mint for freshness, sage for cleansing, rosemary for its sharp, clear scent. The heat draws their oils into the water, and soon the fragrance rises with the steam, subtle but steady, threading through every corner of the room. There is a kind of patience in this waiting. You cannot rush water into heat. It must sit over the fire, each degree earned slowly. The time is used for other preparations, laying out a clean lion cloth for drying, setting the tub near the hearth, sweeping the floor so that bare, damp feet will not step into dirt. In some homes, a small wooden stool is placed beside the tub for resting soap or a ladle. Soap itself is a modest thing here, not the smooth, perfumed bars of the wealthy, but a rough-hewn block made from animal fat and lye, often with a faint scent of ash. It cleans well, though it can be harsh on the skin in winter. Many prefer to wash with just the warm, herb-scented water, letting the heat and gentle rubbing do the work. When the water in the cauldron is ready, it must be moved carefully, steadily, so that not too much is lost in the journey from hearth to tub. The ladle dips in, filling smaller buckets that can be carried without spilling. Each bucket is poured into the tub, the sound deepening as the water rises. Steam curls up from the growing pool, fogging the air just above it. The surface ripples gently, catching the orange glow of the fire. The water is tested by hand, fingers dipped in, feeling for that point between too cool and too hot. If it is too warm, a splash of cold well water is added. Too cool, more time on the fire, or a bucket of hotter water fetched from the cauldron. The goal is comfort, not endurance. For families with many members, there is an unspoken understanding. The first bather enjoys the water at its best. After each turn, more hot water may be added, but over time the herbs lose their scent, the steam thins, and the water grows cooler. Still, even at the end, the warmth is welcome against the skin, the act of bathing a small luxury in a life that offers few. And so, with the tub ready and the water fragrant and warm, the moment of bathing can begin. The hearth glows, the air is thick with the mingled scents of wood smoke and rosemary, and outside the kitchen, the night deepens. The work of preparation, the fetching, the heating, the tending is done, and what remains is the quiet reward of lowering oneself into the water, letting it ease the day's labor from the bones. In a countryside home, this preparation is never just about the bath itself. It is about care for the home, for the family, for the small rituals that mark the passage of the week. Each bucket drawn from the well, each log placed on the fire, each bundle of herbs dropped into the pot is part of that care. And when the bath is over, the warmth stays a little longer in the skin, a reminder of the hands and the time that made it possible. In the countryside, bathing is rarely a solitary ritual. Here, in homes where space is measured by the width of the hearth and the number of beds in the loft, the bath belongs to the family. The tub is small, the firewood precious, and the water too costly in time and labor to heat afresh for each person. And so, bathing is a shared act, one shaped by custom, respect, and the quiet understanding of those who live close together. The sequence is usually set long before the water begins to steam. In some households, the father bathes first, as a sign of his position or simply because he comes in from the day's work chilled and stiff. In others, the order flows from youngest to oldest, the smallest children taking their turn before the water cools too much, their ladder and splashing briefly breaking the calm. Sometimes the mother slips into the tub after the children, using the same water, pouring it over her shoulders with practiced hands. Privacy, as we think of it now, is rare. Modesty exists, but it is woven into movement and habit rather than walls and doors. A thin cloth might be draped across the lap when others are near, or a family member might turn their back while someone steps in or out. The body is not hidden from view so much as it is treated with a kind of everyday courtesy, acknowledged without unnecessary attention. The kitchen itself becomes the bathing room. The firelight throws a soft, amber glow on the row-plastered walls. Shadows shift across the low beams of the ceiling. The smell of the bathwater, warm, clean, threaded with herbs, mixes with the ever-present scent of wood smoke and the faint aroma of whatever meal was last cooked in the cauldron. It is not the scent of luxury, but of home. For the children, bath time is often a moment of joy. The tub is a place to play in a way the rest of the house does not allow. They trail their fingers through the water, watch it ripple, jiggle at the way soap suds cling to their skin. Their mother might gently scrub behind their ears, lift a wet curl from a forehead, or rinse the dust from small toes. It is work, yes, but it is also affection made visible, a care that goes beyond the daily chores of feeding and clothing. Adults treat the bath more quietly. They sink into the water with a sigh, closing their eyes for a moment against the day's weight. The heat seeps into muscles stiff from bending in fields, chopping wood, or standing over a workbench. They wash methodically, arms, neck, face, hands, each movement unhurried, almost meditative. A rough lion cloth serves as both sponge and scrub, the friction waking the skin. Air washing is done sparingly, the water poured carefully over the scalp so as not to splash too much onto the floor. Conversation during bathing tends to be simple, if there is any at all. Children may chatter, but adults speak in low tones, if they speak at all. The soundscape is soft, the occasional splash of a ladle, the creak of the tub as someone shifts, the crackle of the hearth. Outside, the muffled sounds of the village, a barking dog, the crunch of footsteps in the yard feel distant, separated by the warm cocoon of the kitchen. There is a rhythm to the process. When one person is done, they step out carefully, wrapping themselves in a cloth that may be warmed by the hearth. A seat near the fire is ready for them, so they do not lose the heat too quickly. Another steps in, testing the water, perhaps adding a bucket of fresh hot water from the cauldron to bring back some of the lost warmth. The water grows cloudier with each turn, but the comfort of the heat outweighs the concern for perfect clarity. In some families, a small ladle of clean water is poured over the body at the end, as a kind of rinse. This water is kept separate in a bucket, and only used at the close of the bath, so it feels especially fresh against the skin. It is a small luxury, but one that leaves the bather feeling fully renewed. When all have bathed, the work of cleaning up begins. The water, now cool and heavy with the day's dirt, is lifted out of the tub with buckets and poured into the yard or the garden, where it seeps back into the earth. The tub is rinsed with a final splash of clean water, then set aside to dry. Towels and cloths are hung near the hearth to warm and dry overnight, ready for the next use. The warmth of the bath lingers. Skin feels lighter, clothes softer against the body. There is a subtle lift in mood, a sense of being more prepared to face the next day's work. For the children, hair still damp, and smelling faintly of rosemary or mint, bedtime comes quickly. They curl under their blankets, their bodies heavy with the pleasant weight of warmth. In a rural home, bathing within the family is not just about physical cleanliness. It is about continuity, passing on the habits of care, the knowledge of how to make do with what is at hand, the understanding that warmth and water are gifts to be used wisely. It is about the closeness that comes from living, working, and resting together, where even something as simple as a shared bath becomes part of the thread that binds the household. And perhaps that is why, years later, those who grew up in such homes remember bath nights not as chores, but as small, bright moments, the steam rising against the low rafters, the glow of the fire on the walls, the quiet hum of family voices, and the feeling of being cared for, completely, in the simplest of ways. When the days grow longer, and the air turns warm, the rhythm of bathing in the countryside shifts. The fire in the hearth burns lower, saved for cooking rather than heating buckets of water. Instead, the fields and lanes open onto another kind of bathing place, the slow, glinting curve of a river, the quick, playful chatter of a stream, or the wide, still mirror of a lake. In summer, water no longer needs coaxing into warmth. It carries the sun's touch on its surface, the shallows heated to a gentle comfort by afternoon light. The banks are thick with reeds and grasses, their seed heads swaying in the breeze. Dragonflies hover, their wings catching glints of blue and green. Somewhere upstream, the water makes its music over a spill of stones, the sound steady and low. Villagers know these places well. There are favored bends in the river where the current is slow, where the bottom is firm underfoot, and where the bank slopes gently enough to wade in without stumbling. A cluster of flat rocks may serve as a place to leave clothes and bundles. These are the summer bathing houses of the countryside, open to sky and wind, shaded in part by willows or alder trees. Here, bathing is often a communal act, though not in the same way as the town bathhouse. Families may come together in the early evening, after the hottest work of the day is done. Men and women usually choose separate stretches of bank, divided by distance or by a bend in the water, out of modesty and custom. Children, as always, are quick to find each other, darting in and out of the water with splashes and laughter. The act of bathing in a river is both simpler and more demanding. There is no tub to sit in, no wall to lean against, no constant source of fresh hot water. The river is what it is: cool in the shallows, colder in the deeper channels, alive with the shifting of light and current. The first steps in can steal the breath, even on a warm day, but soon the body adjusts, the skin tightening before yielding to the embrace of the water. Soap is rarely used here, partly because it slips away too easily in the current, and partly because of the belief that the river's flow itself carries away dirt and weariness. Instead, washing is done with the hands rubbing arms, shoulders, face, hair, letting the water's movement do the rest. In the stiller pools, one might float on the back, eyes closed against the bright sky, feeling the gentle push and pull of the water beneath. For women, bathing in the river often has a social side. While one rinses her hair, another might help comb out tangles or braid it once dry. Conversation flows as steadily as the current news from neighboring villages, recipes, the progress of the gardens. Water drifts across the water, blending with the rustle of leaves. For men, river bathing may be more brisk, a matter of washing quickly before heading home, though some linger to fish or to share a jug of ale on the bank. Children see no distinction between bathing and play. The river is a place to practice swimming, to chase minnows in the shallows, to launch floating sticks and see whose will win the race downstream. Their voices rise in shouts and squeals, their hair plastered to their foreheads, their feet stirring clouds of silt that drift away with the current. But rivers and lakes carry their own cautions. In spring, when the snowmelt swells the streams, the current can be deceptively strong, pulling at ankles and sweeping away the unwary. In midsummer, there is the danger of leeches in still waters or sharp stones hidden beneath the surface. Parents keep a careful watch, and older children are taught early where it is safe to enter, how to test the depth, and when to leave the water. Evening is a favored time for bathing. The sun's heat still lingers, but its glare softens, and the air begins to cool. After washing, one can sit on the bank, hair drying in the breeze, skin warmed again by the last light of day. Clothes smell faintly of the outdoors when put back on a mix of sun, grass, and the clean sharpness of the river. Sometimes, the river bath is not planned but taken out of need after a long day's work in the fields when sweat has soaked the shirt through, or after tending animals, or walking miles in the dust. In these moments, the sight of the water is like a promise kept. Even a quick wade in, a rinse of face and arms, can feel like a renewal. Lake, too, has its devotees. Its waters are deeper, its surface still and reflective in the early morning, rippling only with the movements of fish beneath. Bathing here can feel more private, more meditative. The swimmer slips into the cool embrace, the world narrowing to the ring of water that surrounds them, the distant shore like a painted line. In the quiet of dawn, with mist still curling from the surface, it is easy to imagine that nothing has changed for centuries, that the same scene greeted those who bathed here 100, even 200 years ago. For all their differences, the enclosed warmth of the kitchen tub, the shared steam of the town bathhouse, the open freedom of the river, each bathing place offers the same gift: a pause. A moment when the body is cared for, the mind set at ease, and the day feels balanced again. When the villagers walk home from the river in the fading light, hair damp and clothes clinging faintly to their skin, they carry that balance with them. Supper will taste better, the night air will feel softer, and sleep will come more quickly. The water, in its quiet way, has washed away more than dirt. It has taken a little of the day's weight, leaving behind only the warmth of the fire waiting at home and the gentle rhythm of another summer evening in the countryside. In the Middle Ages, cleanliness was not simply a matter of will. It was also a matter of means. To bathe, whether in the heart of a bustling town or the quiet edges of the countryside, required resources: coin, time, fuel, and, perhaps most precious of all, water itself. In towns, the cost was most clearly measured in money. The public bathhouse was open to nearly anyone who could pay the entry fee, but that fee, modest though it might seem to some, could be out of reach for others. Laborer might earn only a few pennies a day, and even a single coin given to the bathhouse could mean less bread on the table. For the wealthier townsfolk, merchants, master craftsmen, and their families, the fee was nothing, easily paid and forgotten. But for the poor, it meant planning. A visit to the bathhouse might be saved for after a profitable week, or just before a church festival, or perhaps on market day when a trip into town was already necessary. The price itself varied from place to place. In some cities, the fee was fixed by the local guild or the town council. In others, it was left to the keeper's discretion. Some bathhouses offered reduced rates in the final hours of the day, when the water was cooler and less fresh. Others allowed partial payment in goods: a bundle of firewood, a measure of grain, or a service rendered. Even with such arrangements, the bathhouse was, for many, an occasional luxury rather than a regular habit. In the countryside, the coin cost disappeared, but another kind of price took its place. There was no fee to fill the tub in the kitchen, but there was the cost of labor, and in rural life, labor was currency. Every drop of water had to be carried from its source. Every log burned in the hearth had to be cut, split, and stacked, often months before it was needed. The hours spent fetching water and tending the fire were hours not spent on other work, and in a household where every pair of hands was needed, this was no small sacrifice. For this reason, full baths in the countryside were less frequent, especially in winter when the cold made the process harder and firewood scarcer. Partial washing was the norm: hands, face, and feet daily, with a full bath reserved for special times, before a holiday, after a long illness, or at the change of the seasons. In the summer, the river or stream provided relief, but even then, distance and safety mattered. A family living near a wide, slow river could bathe easily. One living miles from the nearest water source had fewer opportunities. Access was also shaped by geography. In some towns, bathhouses were clustered near the market square or along the main thoroughfare, easy to reach for anyone living inside the walls. In others, they were set on the outskirts, near the river or stream that supplied them. A townsman living far from the bathhouse might visit less often simply because of the walk, especially in bad weather, when icy streets or deep mud made travel slow. In rural areas, the location of water shaped not only bathing but daily life itself. A cottage beside a spring or well had a clear advantage over one where water had to be carried from a distance. During times of drought or freezing cold, the difficulty increased. Ice had to be broken on the surface of the well or river, and buckets hauled up with numb fingers. In such times, bathing could feel less like a choice and more like a rare indulgence. Seasonal rhythms also played a role. In the height of summer, when days were long and warm, both town and country folk bathed more often. Townspeople could visit the bathhouse in the evening, cooling off after the day's heat. Country folk could step into the river or wash outdoors without fear of the chill. In winter, however, habits changed. In town, the bathhouse became a refuge, but only for those who could afford its fee and spare the time. In the countryside, the tub by the fire was used less often, and quick washes with a damp cloth replaced full immersions. Social standing influenced access too. In the town, the wealthy could arrange for private bathing at home, sparing themselves the need to share space and water with strangers. They could afford imported herbs, scented oils, and the labor of servants to carry and heat water. The poor had no such luxuries. Their baths, when they came, were simple affairs, shared with family or taken in the public hall with whatever the day provided. In the country, wealth showed itself in the size of the hearth, the number of servants, and the ease with which extra firewood could be spared for comfort rather than necessity. But perhaps the greatest cost, in both town and country, was time. Bathing took hours to prepare, to enjoy, to clean up after. The blacksmith who worked from dawn to dusk, for the mother tending children and animals, for the shepherd walking miles over hills, those hours could be difficult to find. Choosing to bathe meant setting aside other tasks, and in a world where every task was tied to survival, that choice carried weight. And yet, people did make the choice. They saved the coin, they carried the buckets, they cut the extra wood. They understood that the price of bathing in money, in labor, in time brought a return beyond the feel of clean skin. It brought relief from itches, a sense of renewal, and a small but vital measure of dignity. In Market Square of a busy town, you might see it in the way a man stands a little straighter, his hair freshly combed after a morning at the bathhouse. In a countryside lane, you might see it in the way a child's face glows pink after a rare winter bath, their hair still damp beneath a woolen cap. The cost is not forgotten, it is carried in the memory of the work it took, but so is the worth of what was gained. Bathing, then, was never entirely free, no matter where one lived. But whether paid in coin or in the sweat of one's own labor, the reward was the same, a few moments of comfort in a world that offered few, and the quiet satisfaction of stepping back into daily life feeling, if not transformed, then at least refreshed. In the Middle Ages, the calendar was not just a measure of time, it was the great clock that governed work, food, clothing, and even cleanliness. Bathing, whether in the town's warm bathhouse or the countryside's humble tub or riverbank, followed the turning of the year as faithfully as the sowing and harvest. Winter, the season of rationed warmth. When winter settled in, the air itself became a gatekeeper to bathing. The cold could be sharp enough to sting the lungs, and in poorly insulated homes, every room outside the hearth's reach was as chill as the outdoors. In the countryside, this meant full-body baths grew rare. Firewood was a guarded treasure, each log saved for cooking or keeping the main living space just barely warm. If bathing was done at all, it was usually in the evening, with the tub drawn close to the fire so that heat from hearth and water could combine. The steam would rise into the rafters, curling into the dim spaces where dried herbs and onions hung for storage. Even so, every trip from tub to stool, every moment spent drying, was a battle against the bite of the air. Families moved quickly, and children were wrapped in woolens as soon as they were dry. In towns, the bathhouse offered a reprieve from winter's grip if one could afford it. Here, the room was warm enough for bare feet on the floor, the steam heavy enough to blur the far wall. People lingered longer, not only for the bathing itself but for the comfort of being surrounded by warmth. In the depths of winter, the bathhouse became a kind of sanctuary, a place to thaw the body and the spirit. Spring, the season of renewal, spring brought change, and with it, an easing of bathing routines. In countryside, melted snow swelled streams and rivers, and wells filled to the brim. Water was easier to fetch, and the warming air meant that washing outdoors, even partially, was less of a shock. Families might begin to launder bedding more often, giving the whole home a fresher feel. Baths in spring were sometimes tied to symbolic rainfall. Before Easter or other spring festivals, households made a point of cleaning both their homes and themselves, scrubbing away the heaviness of winter. Herbs returned to the watered fresh mind, early thyme, not just for their scent but for the feeling that green things meant life was beginning again. In towns, the arrival of spring also meant that bathhouses could ease their heating. The rooms were still warm, but now the walk there was pleasant, the streets no longer slick with ice. Travelers began to arrive in greater numbers, bringing new faces to the bathing halls and fresh conversation to the wooden benches. Summer, the season of open water. In summer, the barriers to bathing fell away almost entirely. The countryside embraced the rivers, streams, and lakes. Bathing moved outdoors, into the sunlit shallows where the water glimmered and the air was heavy with the scent of wildflowers. Children bathed more often, partly because they were dirtier from play, and partly because the water felt like relief after long hours under the sun. In towns, the bathhouse was still used, but the riverbanks and public washing areas also became informal bathing spots. Laborers might wade in at the end of the day, splashing their faces and rinsing away the dust of work. For those who could not pay for the bathhouse, summer was the season when nature itself offered its own open-air bath. Summer baths were leisurely when time allowed, hair washed more often, clothes rinsed and dried in the same afternoon. The longer days gave more room in the schedule, and the warmth made lingering in damp clothes less risky. Autumn, the season of preparation. Autumn marked the slow return to restraint. In the countryside, people began to measure their wood piles and think of the cold to come. Bathing was still possible outdoors early in the season, but the air cooled quickly after sunset, and families began moving their baths back indoors. The kitchen tub saw more use again, with the last of the summer herbs dried and stored for the months ahead. In towns, autumn meant that the bathhouse became a gathering point once more, not just for washing but for exchanging news before the busy work of the harvest festivals and winter preparations. The rooms filled with the smell of apples, nuts, and spices as people came in from the markets, bringing the scent of the season with them. How seasons shaped the idea of clean. The change of seasons also shifted what people considered clean enough. In summer, with more access to water and warmth, expectations rose. Hair might be washed weekly, clothes laundered more often, and skin kept free of dust and sweat. In winter, standards softened not out of neglect, but from necessity. Hands and faces were washed daily, but full baths became less frequent, and clothing might be worn longer between washes, aired out near the fire to freshen. Even the sense of bathing changed with the seasons. Summer brought the freshness of mint, rose petals, and crushed leaves. Winter baths, when they came, carried the resinous warmth of pine, juniper, and sage, chosen as much for their invigorating qualities as for their fragrance. The seasons hand in memory for those who lived through these rhythms. The memory of a bath was tied as much to the season as to the act itself. A winter bath might be remembered for the way the fire's glow seemed to wrap the whole room. A spring bath might be remembered for the sharp, sweet scent of herbs gathered that very morning. A summer bath might linger in memory, as a golden hour at the river, hair drying in the sun. An autumn bath might be recalled for the way the air outside bit just enough to make the water's warmth feel like a shield. In the medieval world, the seasons wrote the script for daily life, and bathing followed their cues. And whether in the coldest months or the warmest, each bath hard-earned as it was offered its own kind of comfort, shaped by the air, the light, and the time of year. To understand bathing in the Middle Ages, it's important to remember that the very idea of clean was different from our own. Today, we measure cleanliness by daily showers, fresh clothes every morning, scented soaps, and the absence of any trace of dirt or sweat. For the medieval townsman or villager, clean was something else entirely, a blend of appearance, smell, and practicality shaped by the limits of time, resources, and culture. Clean enough to be presentable for most people, especially in rural areas, cleanliness was defined by being presentable in public, particularly in church, the market, or any formal gathering. That meant a face free of obvious grime, hands washed, hair combed, and clothing that was tidy, even if it wasn't freshly laundered. Shoes might still be dusty from the road, but the wearer stood straight and looked ready to take part in community life. It wasn't about scrubbing away every speck of dirt that was impossible in a world where most people worked with their hands and lived close to the land. Instead, it was about signaling respect for the occasion, for the people you were meeting, and for yourself. The role of scent smell played a role, but it was approached differently. Strong, unpleasant odors were avoided when possible, especially in closed spaces like church pews or market stalls. People might use herbal sachets, sprigs of rosemary or lavender, or scented oils to freshen themselves, particularly if full bathing wasn't possible. However, the idea that a person's skin should smell of nothing but soap was foreign. In fact, a faint scent of work wood smoke from the hearth, from the field, even the tang of iron from a smithy was not considered offensive. It was simply part of life. In towns, those who could afford it might use more elaborate perfumes or scented waters, particularly before social events. In the countryside, scent was tied more closely to the natural materials at hand, mint, sage, chamomile, juniper. These were as much for their supposed health benefits as for their fragrance. Clothing as a measure of cleanliness. Clothing was one of the most visible markers of cleanliness. In an age when laundering was time-consuming and hard on fabrics, garments were not washed after every wear. Instead, they were brushed, shaken out, and aired by the fire. Lie-in undergarments, worn close to the skin, absorbed sweat and were washed more often, keeping outer garments cleaner for longer. A fresh lie-in shift or shirt, even beneath an unwashed tunic, was a sign of personal care. In wealthier households, frequent changes of lie-in were a mark of status. A noblewoman might change her smock daily, while a laborer might own only two, alternating them between wash days. In the countryside, fresh clothing was often reserved for Sundays or feast days, when everyone wanted to present their best self. Hair and grooming. Hair care was also part of cleanliness. For women, combing was an important daily ritual, both to keep the hair neat and to remove dust or lice. Men, too, kept beards and hair trimmed to manageable lengths, especially in warmer weather. Washing hair was less frequent than combing. It required more water and drying time. In towns, a bathhouse visit might include hair washing, with an attendant pouring warm water over the head and working in a small amount of soap or herbal rinse. In the countryside, hair washing was often reserved for warmer months, when the drying process was less risky. Spiritual cleanliness. Cleanliness also carried a moral and spiritual dimension. Church teachings often linked physical cleanliness to moral purity, especially before attending Mass or receiving communion. Washing the hands and face before entering a sacred space was a sign of reverence. Some holy days even became traditional times for full baths, much as they were for laundering household linens. However, there were also periods when the Church discouraged excessive bathing, fearing it encouraged vanity or mixed-gender impropriety in public bathhouses. This tension meant that cleanliness was a balance encouraged for health and propriety, but not to the point of indulgence. Health and practicality. Medieval people understood, in their own terms, that cleanliness could help prevent illness, even if they lacked modern germ theory. Washing hands before eating, keeping wounds clean, and rinsing the mouth were seen as sensible habits. They also knew that keeping bedding and clothing clean helped prevent pests like fleas and lice, which were linked to disease. Bathing, when it happened, was not just for appearance, it was part of staying healthy enough to work and live. Different standards for town and country townsfolk, living in closer quarters and more aware of how they smelled to others, generally kept to a slightly higher standard of visible cleanliness. Bathhouses made it easier for them to wash fully, and they were more likely to own multiple sets of clothing for rotation. In the countryside, where neighbors were fewer and work was dirtier, clean was defined more by comfort and practicality. A shepherd in the fields needed only to be clean enough for himself and his family most days. More effort was saved for Sunday service or special gatherings. Why dirt was not the enemy. Unlike our modern view, dirt itself was not seen as a constant enemy. Earth was part of life. To farm, to tend animals, to build or repair all meant getting dirty. Medieval people did not expect to keep the skin spotless, and they did not associate a bit of dust on the hands or face with neglect. What mattered was whether the dirt was allowed to build up to the point of obvious uncleanliness, unpleasant smell, or visible disorder. The feel of clean. Even without modern soaps and hot showers, people still valued the physical feeling of being clean. The relief of warm water on tired muscles, the lightness of skin after scrubbing, the comfort of clean linen against the body. These sensations were as real and appreciated then as they are now. That feeling might be experienced only occasionally, but when it came, it was remembered. Cleanliness as a social signal. Ultimately, cleanliness was a language. It told others how you valued yourself, how you respected the people you were meeting, and how you fit into the order of the community. A merchant presenting himself at a guild meeting in fresh linen, a farmer's wife arriving at church with neatly braided hair, a journeyman walking into a tavern with a recently washed face, all were sending the same message: I am ready to be seen. In medieval Europe, bathing was never just a matter of comfort or cleanliness, it was also woven into the threads of faith and custom. The church stood at the center of daily life, its bells marking the hours, its teachings guiding behavior, and its calendar shaping the rhythm of the year. Bathing, like so many other human acts, carried a moral and symbolic weight. The church's endorsement of cleanliness from the pulpit, priests often spoke of the body as a vessel for the soul, and though physical beauty was not to be idolized, there was virtue in presenting oneself clean and orderly before God. Washing hands and face before attending Mass was common advice, and for major feast days, Easter, Christmas, Pentecost, a more thorough cleaning was encouraged. In some towns, the bathhouse would be busiest on the eve of a holy day, with families arriving together so that they might present themselves freshly washed for the celebration. For certain religious orders, such as the Benedictines, cleanliness was part of the daily rule. Monks were expected to bathe periodically, though never excessively, and to keep their habits and bedding clean. In convents, nuns followed similar guidelines, often using basins for partial washes and reserving full baths for set times. The moral limits of bathing. Yet the church stance on bathing was not without caution. Too much indulgence in the bathhouse, especially public mixed bathing, was seen as morally dangerous. In some places and periods, church authorities warned that excessive bathing could lead to vanity, lust, or idleness. There were even times when moral reform movements pushed for stricter separation of men and women in bathhouses, or reduced the frequency of public bathing altogether. In the countryside, where bathing was mostly a family affair or done in rivers, these warnings had less direct impact. But in towns, especially where bathhouses also served as social spaces, the church's influence could be felt in new rules, posted schedules, and occasional sermons directed at keeping the baths pure. Washing before sacred acts. Bathing and washing were also tied to specific religious acts. Before weddings, the bride and groom were often expected to bathe, symbolizing a new beginning. Women preparing for childbirth sometimes bathed beforehand, both for cleanliness and as a blessing for the child to come. In certain regions, washing in holy water or water drawn from a well blessed by a saint was believed to carry healing or protective powers. On pilgrimage routes, towns with famous shrines often had public baths or washing stations for travelers to cleanse themselves before entering the holy site. This practice echoed ancient traditions from many faiths, where water was seen as both physically and spiritually purifying. Seasonal and festival customs. The church calendar, filled with feast days and saints' days, created a natural pattern for bathing. Just as linens and homes were cleaned in preparation for major festivals, so too were bodies. Easter, in particular, was often accompanied by washing rituals, a way of marking the spiritual rebirth of the season with a physical renewal. Midsummer's Day, a festival that blended Christian and older folk traditions, often saw outdoor bathing in rivers and lakes, not only for refreshment but as a symbolic cleansing. In some regions, it was believed that washing in running water on this day could ward off illness for the rest of the year. Folk beliefs and superstitions beyond the formal teachings of the church, local customs shaped when and how people bathed. In some villages, there were days considered unlucky for bathing, often linked to local saints' days or old pagan observances absorbed into Christian life. Certain herbs were added to bath water at specific times of the year, believed to protect against spirits or misfortune. Washing in the first rain of May was thought in some places to bring beauty and good health. In coastal regions, bathing in the sea on particular feast days was believed to cure ailments of the skin. These practices often coexisted comfortably with church teaching, as long as they did not cross into what priests considered superstition or magic. Bathing as an act of charity in towns with established guilds or wealthy patrons, it was not uncommon for bathhouses to open free of charge on certain feast days, particularly for the poor. Some monasteries also offered bathing facilities to travelers and the needy, seeing the act of providing warmth and water as part of their charitable duty. In these moments, bathing became more than personal care, it was an expression of community and compassion. The balance of body and soul. The church's guidance on bathing reflected a constant balance. The body should be cared for, but never to the neglect of the soul. Washing was encouraged to prevent illness, to show respect in worship, and to uphold the dignity of the individual. But it was also to be kept in its proper place, as a means rather than an end. For the medieval Christian, to bathe before stepping into a cathedral was not only to remove dirt, but to present oneself as worthy of standing in the presence of the sacred. To bathe before a wedding was to honor both God and the partner to be. To bathe after a long journey to a holy site was to prepare the body for the blessings sought. Religion and daily practice. In the end, religion and custom shaped bathing into something more than a chore. It was a moment, whether at the bathhouse in town, at the kitchen tub in the village, or at the bend of a river, when the act of washing carried with it the weight of preparation, reverence, and belonging. It was not about chasing an impossible modern standard of perfection, but about being ready. Ready for prayer, for celebration, for the turning of the season, for the gaze of neighbors, and for the eyes of God. Facts tell us how medieval people bathed, but voices, even imagined through the lens of recorded habits, letters, and chronicles, bring us closer to the living experience. Let us listen, then, to a few figures from different walks of life, each speaking in the rhythm of their own days, their own work, their own place in the world. The Merchant's Wife Town Bath House. Late winter. The streets were still crusted with frost this morning, but the sun was sharp enough to catch in the windows. My husband closed the shop early so that we might visit the bathhouse before the crowd. The keeper knows us. I've been coming here since I was a girl, and he saved a place for me near the smaller tub, the one where the water is hotter. I brought my own linen towel, and a comb of horn, though I confess I enjoy using the rosemary rinse they keep here. It leaves my hair softer than the soap at home. There were two other women in the tub, one a seamstress with red, chapped hands, the other a widow who spoke of her nephew's apprenticeship. The heat seeps into my shoulders until I feel lighter, almost drowsy. When I step back into the cold street, I know my face will be pink and my hair will steam for a while. It'll smell faintly of herbs, and when I walk into the shop again, my husband will smile, because he knows this is the one indulgence I never deny myself. The village mother kitchen tub. Early spring. The well water is still sharp and cold, but I drew enough this morning for washing. We burned through more wood than I'd like to heat it, but the children had been working in the garden and were caked in dirt up to their knees. The tub sits by the hearth, steam rising. I bathed them one by one, the youngest first. They jiggled when I poured water over their heads with the ladle, but they stayed still long enough for me to scrub behind their ears. My eldest went last, his tall enough now that his knees poke above the rim. When they were done, I took what was left lukewarm, a little cloudy, and used it to wash my arms, face, and hair. It's not the same as sinking into a fresh tub, but the scent of the mint I threw in is still there. Tonight, the sheets will feel clean, and well, I'll sleep easier. The Traveling Monk. Riverbank. High summer. I've walked 3 days along the pilgrimage road, dust clinging to my sandals, the hem of my robe stiff with sweat. This morning, the path took me past a bend in the river where the water runs clear, and the willows bend low enough to hide a man from the road. I set down my pack, folded my robe neatly on the bank, and stepped in. The water's coolness rose from my ankles to my knees, and by the time it reached my waist, the heat of the road had left me. I washed with my hands only, no soap, rubbing the grit from my skin, dipping my head beneath the surface to rinse away the dust. When I climbed out, I let the sun dry me while I prayed the midday office. The river sound kept my mind steady, as if each ripple carried away a little of the weariness I had been carrying since I left the abbey. The Blacksmith Public Bathhouse. Autumn evening. The forge was hotter than usual today. I've been working on a dozen hinges for the carpenter's new doors. My arms feel like they're carved from the same iron I've been hammering. When the sun dipped, I paid my coin to the bathhouse and stepped into the steam. The keeper's boy poured a bucket of hot water into the tub, and I lowered myself in. He cheesed at once. A quapper was there, talking about the price of oak, and a baker who'd burned his hand on the oven door. We shared the tub without fuss, passing the ladle back and forth. By the time I left, my muscles had loosened, and the smell of smoke from the forge was gone from my hair. I'll sleep well tonight, and tomorrow my hammer will feel lighter in my hands. The Fisherman's Daughter, Lakeshore. Midsummer. The fish have been running well this week, and Father stayed on the water until after dark. Mother and I took the baskets to the market, and when we returned, the air was still thick and warm. I went to the lake with my cousin. The water was still holding the day's heat at the edge, though it cooled quickly as we waded deeper. We floated on our backs, letting our hair spread out around us. She told me about the boy she might marry, and I laughed until the loon startled and took flight. We stayed until the light turned gold, and the surface of the lake was smooth as glass. When I came home, my skin smelled of sun and fresh water, and I felt lighter, as if the lake had taken not only the dust from my skin but the heaviness from my mind. Why these voices matter. Each of these glimpses is different. The merchant's wife savoring a winter bathhouse, the village mother making do with the family tub, the monk seeking refreshment in a quiet bend of river, the blacksmith finding relief in hot water after a long day, the fisherman's daughter floating in a summer lake. What they share is the human truth behind the historical fact. Bathing was more than washing. It was rest. It was conversation. It was renewal. It was, for a little while, an escape from the endless work that defines so much of life. Whether behind the walls of a bustling town bathhouse, in the dim glow of a kitchen fire, or beneath the open sky, these moments were valued, because they were rare and because they made the days that followed feel just a little more bearable. From the first flicker of a hearth fire in a quiet village kitchen to the gentle hiss of steam inside a bustling town bathhouse, bathing in the Middle Ages was always more than the water itself. It was shaped by season and circumstance, by faith and custom, by the unchanging needs of the body and the shifting realities of daily life. In the towns, the bathhouse was a place of warmth and murmur, a shared refuge where strangers sat side by side, the scent of rosemary in the air, the day's grime dissolving into the water. There was order here, rules of entry, quiet respect between bathers, a keeper who watched over both heat and harmony. The wealthy might withdraw to private rooms, their tubs lined with copper and their water scented with distant spices, but even their bathing followed the same essential rhythm: preparation, immersion, renewal. In the countryside, the bath was smaller but no less valued. The kitchen, always the heart of the home, became the bathing room on chosen evenings. Water was fetched with effort, heated with care, poured into the wooden tub that might serve a dozen other purposes through the year. Here, bathing was often a family affair, a practical act wrapped in the closeness of shared space, the glow of the fire softening the edges of a hard day's labor. And beyond both hearth and bathhouse lay the rivers, streams, and lakes, the open-air baths of summer. Beneath the shade of willows or the broad sky of midsummer evening, people stepped into the current, letting the water carry away sweat, dust, and weariness. These baths were freer, wilder, marked by ladder and sunlight and the shared knowledge that such warmth would not last forever. Throughout the year, the seasons dictated how, when, and where people washed. Winter's cold meant rationing heat, guarding every log of firewood, and weighing whether a full bath was worth the effort. Spring brought renewal and the first fresh herbs for scenting water. Summer opened the door to frequent bathing under the sky, while autumn drew families back toward the hearth, preparing for the long months ahead. Cleanliness itself was measured differently. For medieval people, to be clean was to be presentable: face washed, hair combed, clothes brushed and freshened. Dirt from honest work was no shame, and the faint scent of wood smoke or meadow grass was as much a part of a person's presence as the sound of their voice. Full bathing was treasured when it came, not as an everyday routine but as an event, a pause in the steady press of life. Religion, too, left its mark on these habits. Washing before entering a church, bathing before feast days, the symbolic cleansing before weddings or childbirth, these moments tied water to both body and soul. The church encouraged cleanliness as a form of respect but cautioned against indulgence, shaping when and how people bathed in subtle, lasting ways. And through all these variations between rich and poor, town and country, winter and summer, one truth remained: bathing was a shared pursuit of comfort. Whether in a copper-lined tub in a merchant's private chamber, in the steamy main hall of the public baths, in a kitchen tub beside the fire, or in the cool shallows of a river bend, people sought the same relief: the warm loosening of tired muscles, the quiet moment when the body feels lighter and the mind less burdened, the sensation of stepping back into one's clothes with a faint freshness lingering on the skin. It is easy, centuries later, to focus only on the differences: the roughness of the soap, the scarcity of hot water, the long gaps between full baths. But to do so misses the heart of the matter. Bathing, then as now, was an act of care. It was an acknowledgement of the body's needs and a way of restoring not just cleanliness, but dignity. It was a moment, however brief, when a person could set down the weight of the day and feel renewed. Imagine, now, the quiet after the bath. In the town, a man walks home from the bathhouse through lantern-lit streets, his hair still damp, the night air cool against his skin. In the countryside, a woman wraps herself in a woolen shawl, her hair loose and fragrant with mint, the hearth embers painting her face in soft light. By the river, a boy pulls on his tunic, the warmth of the sun still held in his skin as the evening breeze stirs the reeds. Different places, different lives, and yet each one carries the same small comfort home. This was the truth of hygiene in the Middle Ages. Not a story of constant luxury or perfect purity, but a tapestry of moments sometimes humble, sometimes grand, in which water met skin, steam met breath, and a person stepped back into the world feeling, for a little while, restored. And so, as we close our journey, let the sound of water stay with you, the steady pour from a bucket into a waiting tub, the soft lap of a river against the shore, the faint hiss of steam rising in the candlelight. Let it be a reminder that across the centuries, people have always sought the same things: warmth, renewal, and the quiet joy of feeling clean.